Hi, I'm Doug and I'm your tech support representative for Atlantic British, and in this video we're going to touch base on a very common issue that we find on the LR3s and the Sports is the lower control arm suspension. The rear bushing likes to soften up, which creates a lot of movement in the control arm to the point where even stepping on the brake you can actually hear a bang noise coming from underneath. And what that does is throws off your alignment, creates tire wear, instability on steering, overall just does not make the vehicle comfortable to drive. Also can be rather expensive in the end, especially if you're buying tires on a regular basis. So what we're going to do is show you how to remove the lower control arm, and then you have the option of either replacing the control arm with the original equipment bushing, or we also offer a Polybush, which we're also going to show you how to install those. So what we essentially got done is the vehicle's up in the air, tire is off. We've taken the front brakes off because we're also doing brakes on this vehicle, but getting the brakes out of the way does make the job easier and makes the knuckle assembly much lighter to handle. We're not going to take the knuckle out. We haven't shut down the air suspension system. When you put it up in the air, it's going to want to try to deflate a little bit anyway because it's seeing the vehicle up on full height. Alright, so what you're going to do is you're going to remove this bolt, which is actually in the part of or holding the culprit bushing in place. Front bolt on the lower arm. Now you'll notice they're on cams, and these are your alignment cams. It's always good to make a mark on this frame and on the cam so that when you put it back together your alignment will be back in position. Now if the vehicle's been aligned or if this bushing's been worn out for some time, when you change the arm and if you replace a Polybush, it's still best to take the vehicle to a shop and have them do a complete alignment on the vehicle after you do any suspension changeover actually. You've also got your shock absorber air suspension bolt right here. That's going to come out. And then your lower ball joint right here. And this arm you can will be able to slip out of here once you remove those. Now you're also going to remove the nut off the axle because you're going to retract that axle some as you come out forward. You don't want to disconnect this inner CV joint internally. So we're going to push that axle in and get it to slide on the knuckle in the hub so that we can pull this out far enough without yanking that outer CV apart. So 15/16 is going to be your inner bolts, your ball joint bolt, and the nut for your shock with a 7/8 wrench on the other side. So let's start taking it apart. Alright, so just as we figured, this back bolt as it normally is, once you even got the nut backed off, it doesn't turn whatsoever. So there's several different ways you can get that bolt out of there if you have access. One, which is pretty popular, is to take a cut-off saw with a good fine blade and cut between the bushing and the frame, so it'll cut through the bolt and the inner bushing. Cut both sides, that'll drop the ends out and you'll be able to remove it. We can also, if you have access to a torch, we heat up both ends, let the heat work its way to center, and then with an air hammer you can hammer both sides where eventually it'll break loose. Again, just two methods, or you can fight with it for hours trying to get it out of there, because once they lock in pretty tight. So just to let you know, so we're going to have to heat this one up and we're going to try to get it out that way. And we're just going to heat this up cherry red. Alright, so I did manage to get the back bolt out, and what I've done is basically heat up the front and back of the bolt until absolutely cherry red, and then once the heat has had the opportunity to work its way into the middle of the bolt, run it out with an air hammer. Now, just I want to note, being we've heated those bolts up, and we've heated them up cherry red, do not reuse those bolts. Make sure you replace those and the nuts. Now when you took these apart, you also had to notice that you had a nut, you have a flat washer, and then the cam for the alignment. Don't lose that flat washer. Make sure you put it back in place when you go to put this back together. So it's going to be the cam, flat washer, and nut. So now what we need to do is we're going to take the bolt out for the shock, air spring, and also for the lower ball joint. Alright, now before we try to lower that control arm, we're going to loosen and remove the nut for the front axle. The bolt or the nut is pinned over at the factory to lock into this notch in the axle itself so that it can't back off. So essentially what we've done is we've taken what they refer to as a diamond cut or diamond end chisel, run it inside that square or that cutout, and that'll open up the punch so that you can take this nut off without doing a lot of damage to the outer threads, and that'll make reinstalling it very easy. Now also, you don't want to reuse these nuts. It's also recommended right from Land Rover, you take these nuts off, replace them. Make sure you put a new one on. Alright, so I've got the lower control arm lowered down. The only thing basically holding this in place right now is the lower ball joint. Now this is usually a very tight fit between the stud and the knuckle. What I've done is I've backed the nut all the way off, and then I've run it back in so that the bottom edge of the nut is flush with the shaft of the ball joint. I put a flat hammer attachment on my air impact so that when I run this up and hit this, I'm not going to peen over the end of the nut or damage the threads of the ball joint, because you are going to reuse that. Alright, so there we have our lower control arm. The larger bushing in the back is the one that we're going to replace, and we'll show you, actually there's several different ways you can probably do that. To try to press it out is almost impossible on these, but there are some tricks that we can do that'll make that removal a lot easier. If you opt to replace just the whole control arm, you don't have to deal with that. Just take the arm, bolt it right back in just the way we took it out, and you'll be ready to go. So what we've done is we've taken a drill and we've just drilled a number of holes, and it buzzes through the rubber fairly easy, so that we end up knocking the core out, which is nothing more than the metal sleeve and the two areas of rubber that attach it to the outer bushing. So what's left in here right now is just the outer bushing in the control arm. So what we're going to do now is just take a cut-off saw with a good blade on it, and we're going to slice the inside bushing on two sides and then simply just drive it out with a chisel. Okay, so to make things a little bit easier, after we've cut through this initial inner core, we've knocked that out. And what you can use, what I like to use, is actually a dulled out chisel, because if you use a sharp chisel, you may end up just cutting through the lip and not actually driving this out. So a nice dulled out chisel, which I'm sure everybody has in their toolbox, should be able to knock that out. Now what we've done is completely exposed what was left of the outer ring. We're going to cut through that and then remove that as well. Now be careful, check it when you're cutting, stop every 20-30 seconds, whatever, just to make sure you're not cutting into the outer sleeve of the lower control arm. If you put a little mark in it or a small cut, that's just fine, it'll hold up just fine. But what we don't want to do is end up cutting right through at any given point. So there's your outer sleeve. We've cut through one area where you could drive it back with the chisel, get a bite on it, drive it out. And you can see we get a few minor scratches right there. We'll just clean that up with some emery cloth and that'll be just fine. Now we'll show you how the Polybush is installed, and then we'll be reinstalling the lower control arm. This is the Polybush that we carry for this design. And this is essentially a harder bushing and a complete bushing, as opposed to just the two connection points on the original equipment. And it's a very easy installation. And what we're going to essentially do is, if you remember when we drove the old one out, that the extended or larger area of the bushing was on this side. So we're going to install the Polybush in the same direction. And you can just get that lined up. And a nice rubber mallet. Drive that right in. I want to make sure it's fully seated. Make sure no gap between the control arm and the bushing. And then you have your metal core. So there's your installed Polybush in place. No scars, no muss, center core in. You want to make sure you can feel the end of this pretty much flush at both sides. And now we're just going to reinstall this control arm back in place. Alright, so as you can see, we got our Polybush in place. Looks much better than the original. I think this is going to actually make an improvement over the handling of the vehicle. So, we set the ball joint stud in place and drop it into the knuckle assembly. I'm going to take a little juggling. you can twist the control arm so that it pops the bottom of the shock and air spring in place. Now grab our bolts for the lower bushings. Now, as I said earlier, we're not going to reuse the bolt that we heated up for this rear bushing. Once you put heat to it and let it cool, you're going to change the temper of the metal. This is your suspension. This is what keeps you on the road. You're not going to fool around with it. You'll see that both the front and the rear bolt for those both lower bushings are identical bolt. We do stock them here along with the other hardware should you need it for the rest of this assembly. Now, there we do a little wiggle so we can get the shock to drop down. Now it's going to be a little bit of a tight fit, but it will drop in. You may need to give it some persuasion, a little tap here, a little bend there. Put a nut on the ball joint. Just to keep that from going anywhere. A couple pry bars. Now this vehicle in particular is going to be going down for an alignment after we're done because of other work being done to it. But if you were just replacing the control arm, as I said earlier, you made sure you marked the cam and the frame so that you got your position. But with the new bolt, you're not going to have that mark. So you would have marked, as I showed you on the back side, where you would have had the original cam and nut. And you can line that up so that when you're done, the cams are back in their original place. Your alignment should reasonably be within the same area it was before you took it apart. So we've got the bolts in place. We're just going to run the nuts on and the cams. Now remember, with the cams, you also had a flat washer. Don't forget that flat washer. You see your cam is pointing up on the bolt, so your cam for the back side is also going to be pointing up. Then your washer, then your nut. Same with the back side. Cam is up. We put our backside cam on in the up position. Now you may find that that cam should sit flat against the frame. You have two notches on both sides that cam rides on, so it will move the bolt to change your alignment. Make sure that when you set that in there, that cam is laying flat against the frame and not on top of one of those two nubs. Then your flat washer, then your nut, and then what you got left is to run the long bolt through the shock, and that usually takes a little bit of juggling as well, because you'll need to move it back and up. And that's it. We're going to tighten down our bolts. Now ideally, when you get the vehicle back together, if you have access to a drive-on ramp or if you have room to work underneath, what you should do is get the vehicle down on all four, set your height at normal ride height, and then you loosen the two pivot bolts that we just installed and your shock spring bolt. Let it neutralize, let it settle down, and then retighten them. That will basically set all the bushings in their neutral position, and it'll ride a lot better. It'll also eliminate the possibility of any squeaks if you should have one of the bushings stressed because we tightened it when the axles were fully down. That's pretty much it. So if you're going to either change over your lower control arm or you want to install the poly bushings, call any of our knowledgeable salesmen, 1-800-533-2210. And thanks for watching.